My name is Jonathan, and I've spent a lot, and I mean a lot, of my time camping, hunting, and even hiking. I've seen all kinds of predators and have been in some pretty sticky situations at certain times. Everything from a massive storm to forest fires during the summer months. Last fall, my girlfriend and I went camping in a national forest in the Northeast that we'd never been to before. We spent years camping along the West Coast, so we decided to give the East Coast a try. We do have to watch out for bears, coyotes, and even mountain lions. They weren't common in this part of the country, but they're out there. Anyway, we set up our tent on top of a small hill, which we thought was a neat little addition to our camping trip. We set up camp, ate dinner, and went to sleep by 7. At this point, it was well into the 30s and snow had covered the remaining ground. Everything was going according to plan when I woke up to my girlfriend nudging me. In an annoyed tone, I ask her what she needed and she tells me to be quiet and listen. Over the sound of the wind and heavy snowfall, I could faintly hear a voice calling for help. I don't know if it was a man or a woman's voice, but I could definitely tell that someone was in trouble. I tell my girlfriend to stay put and grab my judge while putting on my snow boots. Without hesitation, I walk outside into the snow and head toward the direction of where the voice was coming from. I take about a few good steps into the woods and see a figure standing about 20 feet away from me by a tree. They keep on calling for help and I tell them that I'm here, but they didn't seem to notice or care. They stood stiff as a board, calling for help over and over again. As I'm about 5 feet away, I shine my flashlight and see them get on their hands and feet and bolt into the woods. Due to the light illuminating from my flashlight, I was able to catch a glimpse of its face. Looking back, I remember it being very unnatural. The best thing I could describe it as is that of a wolf. I stood there in shock, trying to process as to what the hell just happened and casually walked back in the direction of camp. My girlfriend already went to sleep at this point and I did as well soon after. We continued our camping trip normally after that, but I still couldn't figure out as to what I saw that night. It didn't even look human.
This happened 2 years ago, August 11th, 2018, and since the anniversary just passed, I thought I should finally share this story. My fiancé and I were on the second night of our 2-night camping trip at a popular camping ground about a half hour from where we live. For reference, my fiancé is black. We live in a predominantly white, conservative, and racist area. This is important later. On our first night, we kept hearing noises in the woods around us. The campsite right beside ours to the right was occupied, but the one to our left was not. The campsites were about 150 yards apart, and we had camped there in the same exact plot the year before. Needless to say, we were familiar with the area and the various kinds of animals that live in the woods. The first night, we heard shuffling around our tent. It was obviously something large and moving around. We brushed it off and assumed that it was just a deer. Now back to the main event. On August 11th, we spent the day at the battlefields a town over with my family. They had all been invited to join us for the day by my fiancé, as a surprise for me while he proposed to me. We stayed with my family into the evening, about 6 p.m., before heading back to our campsite. When we got back, things were really odd. Someone had obviously been in our tent. Our blankets were thrown around, clothes were on the floor, and my backpack had been rearranged and I was missing underwear. But hey, we were stupid 19-year-olds, and decided that since whoever had busted in had left, and hadn't taken anything important, it was fine, they wouldn't come back. So we set up a campfire and sat out until it was dark, roasting hot dogs and s'mores, smoking cigarettes, and celebrating our engagement. Around 9:30 p.m., we put our fire out and decided to go into our tent for the night, to celebrate a little bit more. Nothing too loud or obnoxious. Immediately after we finished, we started hearing the noises outside of our tent again, but this time we focused in. We heard clear footsteps and whispering again. Shit. Make that 2 men walking around our tent. As if we had the ability to read minds, my fiancé said he had to go to the bathroom, and I agreed. The bathroom was up the hill from our site. Most people who were in the lower sites, like ours, drove their cars up to the bathroom. Now, here's the part I still get chills thinking about. We got up, and we were getting dressed. My fiancé had just turned the lights on in our tent and put his binder on when a man spoke directly from us, right outside the tent. "What are you doing?" I can't even describe how malicious and menacing this voice sounded. It was clearly directed at us, and he said it with a snicker. He was watching us through the walls of the tent. Again, for this part, we were just 2 stupid 19-year-olds. So we decided to just run for it to the car. My fiancé grabbed his pocket knife and his keys and stepped out of the tent. He pulled me with him, and we ran like hell to the car. I heard the footsteps running behind us, and then turning and running up to another campsite. At the bathroom, we talked over our options. We talked about sleeping in the car or driving into town. Then we had another idea. We drove back down to our campsite and began packing everything into the car. At this point, it was around midnight. We moved faster than I think either of us thought possible, wrapping up the tent with our belongings still inside it, and grabbing our folding chairs. We were all packed up in 5 minutes and hopped into the car to leave. I jumped out at the end of the drive, grabbed our nameplate, which had my full name on it, off the post. As we pulled out of the campsite, I saw our assailants for the first time. Stalking through the woods into our campsite were 2 tall white men. I realized that these were the same men who had been driving past our campsite the whole time we were there, just glaring at us and muttering to each other. One of them was wearing camo hunting gear, and the other one was wearing a Confederate flag tank top. Both were carrying large hunting knives, unsheathed and at the ready. They turned when they saw our car driving away, and one started to make chase until the other one stopped him. I made eye contact with the man in camo, and he smiled the most terrifyingly evil smile at me, and shook his head slowly. We drove the long way home, taking all the weirdest, hardest to follow roads, and called my dad so he would know we were coming. When we got home, we told my dad everything and he shrugged it off as us being paranoid. So I never told anyone else besides all of you now. I am convinced to this day that this was going to be a racially motivated attack. The campground was not heavily populated, and my fiancé was the only non-white person at any of the campsites. It was no accident that the 2 men who had been shadowing us since our arrival and wore Confederate flags and had one on their truck decided to target the interracial couple. I still get cold chills when I think about how close we were to being killed or seriously hurt that night, and just how lucky we were that our reckless plan to just make a run for it worked.
When I was about 13, I joined the Boy Scouts with a friend of mine that I had known since kindergarten. I wasn't too big on the idea of scouts, but it was something that I considered as productive and something to do. I spent about a good 3 years with them and had met some pretty cool people in my troop that I'm still connected with till this day. During my final year in the Scouts, my troop had to complete a 2-day camping trip as a requirement for the Eagle rank. The purpose of this last and final trip was to use the skills we were taught and apply them in a more complex camping trip. The campsite was called Daniel Boone in North Carolina, which was a very remote location next to a few mountains. When we got there, our scoutmaster had ordered us to unpack our belongings and set up our tents as we only had about a good hour of daylight left. My friend Anthony and I set up our tent right beside a lake a bit further away from the other scouts, but far away enough to where we could still see them. After everything got settled down, the sun had finally set, and a bunch of us started getting a campfire going so we could sit down and enjoy the warmth as it was in the 40s. Anthony had mentioned that he would be staying in the tent as he didn't feel well and that he would pass. We all sat around the fire, talking and having a good time when our scoutmaster called for lights out. I could tell that he was in a really upset mood and I didn't want to risk asking if we could have more time. I bit my lip a bit annoyed and walked back to our tent to find that Anthony wasn't in there. Thinking that he probably went to go take a piss or something, I get into my sleeping bag and turn out my light and start laying there enjoying the cool night air. Fast forward about 10 minutes later, Anthony still hadn't returned yet, and it was at this point where I was starting to get a little worried. 10 minutes turned into 20, and then eventually 30. Fearing that Anthony could have gotten lost, I put on my jacket and go outside with my flashlight looking for Anthony. It eventually came to the point where I had to begin yelling out Anthony's name, hoping to get a response. But all I got instead was dead silence. This got the attention of some other campers coming to ask what was wrong. When I explained the situation, we all went into the woods with our flashlights in hand calling for Anthony. That's when we heard a very loud and blood-curdling scream coming from the other side of the lake. We all booked it and ran around the lake to find Anthony laying down by the shoreline on some rocks. He had multiple wounds to his body and was breathing heavily, but was still able to talk to us. What he told us will forever change my perspective of camping for the rest of my life. Apparently, he had stepped out of the tent to go take a walk around the lake when 2 or 3 men ran out from the woods and tackled him. One of the men proceeded to hit him in the face with a mallet and knocked him out cold. Because the impact of the mallet was so hard, he didn't have the strength to fight back. We ended up ending and rescheduling the trip the next day and went back home. The authorities never did find those men in the woods that attacked Anthony. I'm not sure who they were or what they wanted, but whatever their intentions were, they obviously weren't good.
This happened to my dad and I on a camping trip back in 2015. I'm 23 now, but this experience is one that will forever scar me for life. Growing up, I lived in a very rural area in Idaho. The news media and people who lived in my town were ultra-conservative, and pretty much just about everyone around owned a gun. Being so young, I didn't really understand why, but as I got older, I was learning how to shoot and how to use a gun properly. To the east of my town, there are huge mountains that stretch across the state and go on for miles. As a kid who loved the outdoors, my dad would occasionally take me up there to go hunting and fishing once in a while. A few years ago, my dad and I had gone over there to go on a camping hunting trip, so that I could experience a bigger picture of survival and such. We pitched our tent and started hiking a few miles into the woods to see if we can try to find anything. Even though I liked the outdoors, I wasn't too big on the idea of killing an animal, as I don't see the point in the sport. My dad managed to hunt a rabbit for dinner, and we brought it back to the campsite, and my dad turned the rabbit into a damn good stew. It wasn't what we were hoping to get, but it was pretty much better than nothing. After we ate, my dad recommended that I go to sleep, as we would have a long day tomorrow with more hunting. I had gone to bed while my dad stayed carving a few pieces of firewood to use. Needless to say, I probably fell asleep for about a good hour or so before I woke up to hear my dad unzip the tent and go to sleep beside me. The light from the fire was still giving off a really bright glow on the tent, and so I tapped my dad's shoulder to ask him to put it out. However, he must have been dead asleep because he didn't bother responding to my question. Not even 5 seconds later, my dad came towards the tent, unzipped it, and asked me what I needed from the outside. The very second my dad opened the tent, his eyes became wide with fear. He ever so slowly put his fingers to his lips and tells me to be quiet. It only took me a few seconds to realize what was going on. I slowly turned my head to the left, and I see a man that I'd never seen before give me a wicked smile. His hair was long and messy, and his teeth were cracked. At that point, I screamed to the top of my lungs, and saw this man bolt up and run outside the tent, disappearing back into the woods. My dad had tried shooting at him, but missed terribly due to how dark it was. We left our tent out there, and hopped into the truck, driving to the police station. We explained everything to the police, but they couldn't really do anything as we had very little information. We went to go get our stuff back the next day, and we thankfully never saw that man again, and that's why I will never be going camping again.